An arrest warrant issued for the ousted Ukrainian leader. A call for an immediate end to violence in Bangkok. And a contingency plan for separating mainland and local live chickens.
Good evening. Ukrainian authorities have issued an arrest warrant for Viktor Yanukovych, who was ousted as president last weekend following months of protests against his administration. But neighbor Russia has made no secret of its unhappiness, recalling its ambassador from Kiev. Tony Sabine reports.
It's official. Former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych is a wanted man. Authorities say a warrant is out for Yanukovych and several other officials suspected in the mass killings of civilians, especially during last week's clashes in Kiev. Everyone had been wondering how Russia would react to the fall of Yanukovych, who was replaced as president by the newly elected Speaker of Parliament, Alexander Turchinov. Sure enough, Moscow ordered its ambassador to Kiev back home because of what it calls the deteriorating situation in the country. Russia has long regarded Ukraine as part of its sphere of influence, so it would have been dismayed with Turchinov's announcement overnight that his country would now focus on closer ties with the European Union. As interim president, he will head the transition government until elections are held in May. The EU and the United States have welcomed the departure of Yanukovych, who's fled to an unknown location, possibly Crimea. They also warn Russia against any provocative move, such as sending troops to secure the situation. Britain and other Western countries have pledged financial and other support for Kiev if it needs it.
Political situation, even among the opposition, is very complex. It's urgent that they get on to form that inclusive government, a government of national unity in effect. It's very important for us to continue to try to persuade Russia that this need not be a zero-sum game. It's in the interests of the people of Ukraine to be able to trade more freely with the European Union.
Whether national unity can be maintained is uncertain, with more clashes breaking out in southern Ukraine between pro-Russians and those supporting the new regime. And the leaders of the mainly Russian-speaking regions of eastern Ukraine have vowed to challenge Parliament and its ouster of Yanukovych. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
The latest victims in the political unrest in Thailand include two small children, a brother and sister, who died in a grenade explosion yesterday in Bangkok. The violence is so bad that caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has fled the city, and United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called for an immediate end to the violence.
The grenade exploded near a large protest site in the capital, leaving a trail of blood and sandals on the streets of a popular shopping district. Police investigated the site right in front of a store selling T-shirts emblazoned with Thailand, Land of Smiles. The first to die from yesterday's blast was a 4-year-old boy and a 59-year-old woman. Today, the boy's sister, just 6 years old, succumbed to her wounds and died. Among 22 others injured is a 9-year-old boy clinging to life with head injuries. A medical volunteer showed pictures of the injured boy on his mobile phone. 2 other children are also suffering from head wounds. The violence came shortly after supporters of caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra vowed to get tough with anti-government protesters. The country's Minister of Public Health pleaded with those responsible to stop the bloodshed.
The situation is getting worse because in the past, most of the case is the case between the police and the protester, but nowadays it arrived to the innocent people.
Anti-government protesters organize a memorial. Leader Suthep Thaugsuban led protesters in laying flowers in memory of those killed. At the same time, government supporters, the United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship, or the so-called Red Shirts, began preparing for confrontation. They vowed to deal with Suthep, thereby setting the scene for more violence between pro and anti-government groups. But anti-government protesters insist they'll keep shutting down Bangkok until Yingluck resigns. They want her replaced by an appointed interim government to do what Yingluck has failed to do, which is to implement anti-corruption reforms. For her safety, she's fled the city to an unspecified location, said to be 150 kilometers away from the capital.
Unrest continues in the South American nation of Venezuela. Thousands of anti-government protesters and supporters of President Nicolas Maduro took to the streets of the capital, Caracas, at the weekend. And one of Maduro's most outspoken critics has become the latest rally cry for opposition protesters. More on that from James Aiken.
Another weekend of protests have widened a bitter divide between supporters of President Nicolas Maduro and those who want him out. On Sunday, seniors took their turn as they marched to a government palace where Maduro greeted them. Maduro told the supporters that he will use an iron fist against fascism and violence. But Maduro is facing a growing number of headaches, and this man is becoming one of the biggest. Angel Vivas is a retired Army general and one of Maduro's most outspoken critics. Across town on Sunday, his supporters engaged in an armed standoff with security forces. They rushed to his defense on rumors that police were going to take him into custody for inciting civil disobedience. Sporting a flak jacket, Vivas announced he had no intention of turning himself in. Maduro ordered his arrest in connection with the death of a young supermarket worker who died on Friday after driving his motorcycle into a cable stretched across a road as part of an improvised opposition roadblock. Maduro blames Vivas for encouraging the dangerous tactics. Anti-government protests have claimed as many as 10 lives in the last 2 weeks. The opposition blames the ruling Socialist Party for a legacy of nationalizations, currency controls, and confrontations with business that have crippled the economy. Inflation in the OPEC nation has soared to 56% amid growing crime and food shortages. Maduro says he is fighting an economic war led by the opposition, which he says is supported by the United States. On Wednesday, Maduro hopes to meet with the opposition as well as religious and labor leaders in a bid to restore calm in the nation that continues to see escalating violence and instability. James Aiken, TVB News.
South Korea and the United States have begun their annual joint military drills despite earlier protests from North Korea. The drills are divided into two major exercises that will include more than 160,000 troops. They are slated to last until mid-April. Pyongyang denounces the exercises as a rehearsal for an invasion. But Seoul and Washington say they've been conducted for years without incident. The exercises are taking place as the two Koreas continue their separated family reunion event in the north. Pyongyang allowed the first reunion of families separated by the Korean War after recent high-level talks with Seoul. It's the first reunion in more than 3 years.
The government is working on contingency plans to separate local and mainland chickens once the 4-month ban on live mainland poultry imports is lifted. Ronnie Samtani has more details.
The government is still looking for a temporary storage site for live chickens imported from the mainland while awaiting bird flu test results. Secretary for Food and Health Ko Wing-man estimates it may take a year to secure a site, as the government has to comply with environment regulations and go through land planning procedures. Ko met with members of the local poultry trade this morning.
They reflected strongly to me the desire to have the reintroduction of imported poultry to Hong Kong. We also discussed on the various possible mechanism to allow the reintroduction of imported poultry. We agree that for the time being we will concentrate on the exploration and design of a contingency measure
Ko explained that mainland chickens and locally raised chickens will be sent to the Changsha-wan temporary wholesale market. Blood samples will be taken from mainland chickens at Mankamto for testing before the birds are taken to Changsha-wan, where the authorities will wait for the test results. If the mainland chickens test positive for avian flu, both imported and locally raised birds at the wholesale market will be culled, and the Changsha-wan facility will be closed again for 21 days. But the supply of live poultry from local farms will continue. Instead of Changsha-wan, the birds will be sent to another place for inspection before being sent to retail outlets. Members of the poultry industry have suggested 2 locations to send the local raised chickens, Takwu-ling or a farm in the New Territories. Members of the poultry trade said the government's proposal is a temporary solution. Choi Ming-toon of the Hong Kong Poultry Wholesalers Association said they have no choice but to accept it because there are no other options right now. Lawmaker Vincent Fang, who has been negotiating with the government on behalf of the poultry traders, is not satisfied with the government's proposal.
To our trade, the most important is the short term. How are they going to survive from now until 3 or 4 months from now? And they're facing a lot of problems. Their cash flow is a big problem for them, because if they have to stop for 4 months, then the cash flow will become a major problem for them.
The government said it will finalize its contingency plan in 2 weeks' time. Meanwhile, members of the poultry trade have urged the government to shorten the 4-month import ban so that they can resume their business. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
And still ahead in our newscast, the SAR government under fire from a mainland think tank. A call for opening up the restricted area in Sha Tau Kok, and highlights of the Sochi Winter Games.